Hi, Jonathan York, Bay Financial Partners, looking at the investment markets. Pretty interesting week in the US again. Really, the main sort of focus, obviously, the Fed meeting, but also as well a number of sort of short squeezes. That was sort of really triggered on GameStop. Sort of spurred on by social media, Reddit. GameStop was in a vicious short squeeze, and at one point was up nearly 300 over 300%. Now, as that starts to unwind, now it's really going to get pretty interesting because a lot of the sort of buyers out there on the short squeeze were sort of potentially amateur investors who were very upset about what was happening to the shares. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. Certainly, the start of this week, shares are down nearly 50%. Again, the US economy is sort of pushing on at a pretty reasonable rate. Vaccines are still sort of rolling out, although they have been halted in some of the eastern seaboards as a pretty major storm sort of comes in, and certainly in New York it was put on hold for a couple of days while this sort of snowstorm sort of passed through. But if you look at the Fed, no real surprises. Sort of rates are still sort of 0 to 0.25%. Asset purchases are still the same. And again, sort of Fed implies that rates are really on hold for quite a while. They're quite happy to see a little bit of inflation come through as they're now targeting an average rate. Which if you view that inflation has really been below the target for quite a while, that would imply that as well that inflation can be above their sort of target rate around sort of 2% for quite a while as well for it to average out. On the earnings front, certainly most of the big techs last week were better than expected. Apple and Microsoft are really pretty standout performances. And that along with a new sort of administration that is certainly a lot more user friendly, a lot more transparent. You've still got a Fed that's very accommodative. Say low rates, fiscal policy coming through with further stimulus checks. Oh, and obviously the low rate environment all points to an encouraging market for equities. Also, as well, now in the month of February, we are getting very close to the impeachment trial of Donald Trump. That's going to be interesting. Apparently, he fired his legal team last week and instructed a new legal team to come through. And it's just going to be very interesting to see how this sort of plays through. So on the back of that, obviously oil's still trading pretty well, as potentially there's a little bit of improvement and improved outlook out there for the global growth environment. Now in the UK, it's still pretty dire, although what is happening is their vaccines are rolling out now. They've got over 9 million people vaccinated now. But what they are seeing is that the rate of increase in cases coming through now is starting to fall quite dramatically. Sadly, the same can't be said for the death rate. That's still increasing, but that's really a bit of a laggard effect because once you get the virus and disease, you go into ICU. Potentially you are then on a slippery road, sort of passing away. The mortality rate does start to creep up. but with more and more people getting vaccinated, less and less of people are now catching the virus. So that's certainly a little bit of good news out there, and potentially a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, what is not is that you still got a reasonable number of people out there who understand aren't they going to get vaccinated, or just ignoring the rules and social distancing, etc., and sort of trying to pass the virus on. Closer to home in Australia, getting closer to get that vaccination rolled out. They did have a little bit of well, not really a flare-up, but they had an isolated case in Perth from a managed isolation facility. They did put the sort of city into lockdown, and that seems to be their way of sort of dealing with it. If they do get a case out there, they don't want to see the transmission in the community, so they just put the city or area in lockdown for a week or so, contain it. Then hopefully once it is contained, increased testing, they can then reopen and sort of get back to a more sort of normal stance. And it appears to be working, because certainly New South Wales has reopened its border with Queensland now, and again, the Australian economy is gradually sort of kicking back into gear. Interesting here in New Zealand, we appear to have sort of dodged a bit of a bullet with the community transmission. There were those couple of cases out there, obviously up in Northland, and then in Auckland. But as yet, most of the close contacts have returned negative tests, and sort of fingers crossed they seem to have contained it, acted early, and again, for the last few days now, there's been no cases in the community. Now, obviously, what that has spurred the government on is to sort of rush through the approval of the vaccine. Potentially, that could come as early as today. And if that is the case, then they're looking at sort of Pfizer vaccine potentially towards the sort of end of March. But that's all really dependent on supply. And obviously there is this little bit of stoush in Europe in terms of supply, sort of coming through, that the EU feel they should get preferential treatment. They have been very supportive and helpful for the drug companies up there developing the vaccine, and they feel that you should be at the head of the queue. But again, New Zealand economy, certainly if you do get the vaccine here, again, that will be a further sort of positive sign. Government's still talking about a potential sort of trans-Tasman bubble towards the end of March. And again, that will be certainly supportive for the New Zealand economy, which is still pushing along at a reasonable rate, really spurred on by the housing market. That's obviously really on the back of the sort of low interest rates, so sort of limited supply and increased demand. And now, interestingly, the exercise price has been set for the Kingfish warrants. That's going to be $1.51. Those shares are currently trading around $2.02. So it really is beneficial if you can take up the warrants to do that. And if you're interested in discussing what that involves, they call us on 0800 867 323, or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz. Now, obviously, in this low interest rate environment, it is pretty tough out there for investors who are looking for income. There are plenty of alternatives available out there, so sort of term deposits and bonds, which obviously rely on the interest rates. And if you're interested in discussing what is available, call us on 0800 867 323, or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles. I'm looking forward to speaking to you soon.